I stood in the wings of the National Theater, my heart pounding as I adjusted the delicate beading on my costume. Through the curtain, I could see the audience filling the seats, critics, directors, scouts from prestigious companies around the world. This was it, the moment that would change my life. My phone buzzed. Mom's name flashed on the screen. "Lily, sweetie, we're stuck in traffic. We might be a few minutes late, but we'll be there. Break a leg." I smiled, tears pricking my eyes. After everything, they were finally coming. Finally seeing me dance. Finally choosing me. Except they weren't. Because I'd lived this moment before and I knew exactly what was about to happen. In my previous life, they never came. They went to Sophie's dentist appointment instead, a routine cleaning that could have been rescheduled. They chose her convenience over my dream, just like they always had. But this time, I wasn't waiting for them. This time, I'd changed everything. The stage manager touched my shoulder. "You're on in 2, Miss Chen. Your guests are in box 3, as requested." I glanced up at the private box where my real family sat. The people who'd actually shown up when it mattered. My estranged grandmother, whom I'd found in this second chance at life. The dance instructor who'd believed in me, the friends I'd chosen carefully this time around. The box where my parents thought they'd be sitting was empty. I'd never sent them tickets. As the curtain rose and I stepped into the spotlight, I thought about the day it all changed. The day I died at 23, bitter and broken, having spent my entire life dancing for parents who never watched. The day I woke up at 13 with a second chance and a mission. Never again. The memories of my first life hit me in waves during those early days after my rebirth. I was 13 again, waking up in my childhood bedroom with its pale pink walls and participation trophies lining the shelves. Participation trophies for dance competitions I'd actually won, but which my parents had assumed were just for showing up because they'd never attended. In my first life, I'd danced for 20 years. I'd been extraordinary, not because I was naturally gifted, though I was, but because dance was the only thing that made me feel seen. I poured everything into it, every ounce of loneliness, every moment of neglect, every time my parents chose Sophie over me. Sophie. My younger sister by 2 years. The golden child. The favored one. It wasn't that Sophie was particularly special. She was average in every way. Average grades, average looks, average personality. But she'd been born with a weak immune system, prone to colds and minor infections, and our parents had built their entire world around protecting her. Every decision, every family moment, every resource, every scrap of attention went to Sophie first, Sophie only, Sophie Sophie always. I remembered the day that cemented everything in my first life, my first major dance recital at the Riverside Theater. I was 13, had been training for months, had landed the lead role in our studio's production. It was the biggest opportunity of my young life, and I'd begged my parents to come. "Of course we'll be there," Dad had said, ruffling my hair without looking up from his phone. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," Mom had assured me, distracted by Sophie's complaint about a loose tooth. The day of the recital, I'd rushed home from my final rehearsal, bursting with excitement and nerves. I found Mom in the kitchen, packing snacks into her purse. "Ready?" I'd asked, my costume bag clutched in my hands. She'd looked up, confused. "Ready for what?" "My recital. It starts in an hour." "Oh, honey." Her face had fallen in that practiced way that I now recognized as performative sympathy. "Sophie has a dentist appointment. She's been complaining about that tooth all week, and they finally had an opening today. We need to get it checked." "But it's just a dentist appointment. Can't you reschedule?" "Lily, don't be selfish. Your sister is in pain." "She's not in pain. She just said it was wiggly." Dad had walked in then, keys jingling in his hand. "What's all the yelling about?" "Lily's upset that we're taking Sophie to the dentist instead of going to her dance thing." Dance thing? I'd felt something crack inside my chest. "It's not a thing. It's the Riverside Theater. I'm the lead. I've been practicing for months." "And you'll have other recitals," Dad had said dismissively. "Sophie's health comes first. Your grandmother can take you, can't she?" "Grandma June is in the hospital. That's why she can't come." "Well, then take the bus. You're 13. You're old enough. Come on, Sophie, let's go." They'd left me standing in the kitchen, costume bag dropping from my numb fingers. I'd taken the bus alone. Performed alone, scanning the audience during every turn, every leap, every moment I'd perfected, hoping they'd surprise me. They never came. I'd received a standing ovation from strangers while the 2 seats I'd reserved for my parents remained empty. That was the first of hundreds of times they'd choose Sophie over me. It became a pattern, a guarantee, a fact of life as reliable as gravity. Sophie's science fair over my dance competition. Sophie's birthday party planning over helping me with my scholarship applications. Sophie's friend drama over my acceptance into the pre-professional training program. Sophie's college graduation over my first professional company contract. In my first life, I'd kept dancing anyway, kept hoping, kept believing that one day, if I was just good enough, just talented enough, just successful enough, they'd finally see me. I'd made it to principal dancer at a regional company by 21. They'd missed my debut. Sophie had needed help moving into her new apartment. I'd been offered a contract with a national company at 22. They'd said they'd come to my farewell performance at the regional company. Sophie had gotten food poisoning the night before. They'd stayed home to take care of her. At 23, I'd been hit by a car while walking home from rehearsal in the rain. I'd lain on the wet pavement, my body broken, my phone just out of reach. My last thought had been bitter and sad. They never came. Then I'd woken up at 13, the morning after that first devastating recital, with all those memories intact. The second time around, I'd lain in bed for hours that morning, testing my knowledge. I knew Sophie's loose tooth would fall out on its own in 3 days. I knew Mom would find a stray cat next week and insist on keeping it despite Dad's allergies. I knew that in 2 months, Dad would get a promotion at work that he'd celebrate by buying Sophie a new laptop while giving me a card with $20 in it. I knew everything. And this time, I wasn't going to waste my knowledge begging for scraps of their attention. I'd gotten up, showered, and gone to the kitchen where Mom was making Sophie's favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes. My favorite had been lemon poppy seed muffins, but she'd forgotten years ago. "Morning, sweetie," she'd said absently. "Sophie, here you go, be careful. They're hot." "Morning," I'd replied flatly. "Are you still upset about yesterday?" Mom had asked, finally looking at me. "Honey, you have to understand, Sophie needed—" "It's fine," I'd cut her off. "I understand perfectly." And I did. I understood that I would never matter to them as much as Sophie did. I understood that I could be the greatest dancer in the world, and they still wouldn't prioritize me. But more importantly, I understood that I had been given an impossible gift, a second chance. And I wasn't going to spend it the same way. That day, I'd started planning. First, I'd looked up my grandmother. In my first life, Grandma June, my father's mother, had been hospitalized that week for a minor stroke. She'd recovered, but there'd been tension in the family I'd never fully understood. My father had visited her once after she got out, and then they'd had some kind of argument, and I'd never seen her again. She died when I was 16, and I'd only found out weeks after her funeral. In this life, I'd gone to visit her in the hospital the day after the recital. "Lily?" she'd said, surprised when I'd appeared in her doorway with flowers from the hospital gift shop. "What are you doing here? Where are your parents?" "They're with Sophie," I'd said simply, pulling a chair to her bedside. "I wanted to see you." We'd talked for hours. She'd asked about school, about my life, about dance. She'd actually listened. And when visiting hours ended, she'd held my hand and said, "You look so much like your grandfather. He would have loved to see you dance." "Would you?" I'd asked. "Like to see me dance, I mean?" Her eyes had filled with tears. "More than anything." That's when I'd learned the truth. Grandma June had been pushing to be part of my life for years, but my parents had been freezing her out. Dad was still angry that she disapproved of his marriage to Mom, had said Mom was cold and distant. Grandma had apparently told Dad that he was neglecting me in favor of Sophie, that he was repeating the same favoritism his own father had shown toward his younger brother. Dad had cut her off rather than listen. "I've sent you birthday cards," she'd told me, her voice breaking. "Gifts. I've tried calling. Your father won't let me see you." I'd felt rage bloom in my chest. They'd kept her from me. Kept me from someone who actually cared. "What if I had called you?" I'd asked. "What if I visited when they don't know?" "Lily, I don't want to cause problems between you and your parents." "Grandma, they missed my recital yesterday. They've missed everything. I don't think our relationship can get much worse." She'd held my hand tighter. Then yes. Please. I would love that. That secret relationship with Grandma June became the foundation of my new life. She'd been released from the hospital a week later, and I'd started taking the bus to her house every Tuesday and Thursday after school, telling my parents I was staying late for extra dance practice. They never questioned it. They never checked. Grandma had watched me dance in her living room, tears streaming down her face. She'd asked me about my dreams, my goals, what I wanted from life. She'd told me stories about my grandfather, who'd been a musician, who'd understood the language of art and passion and dedication. You're extraordinary, she'd told me after watching me perform a variation I'd been working on. Truly, Lily, you have something special. My parents don't think so. Then they're fools. She'd cupped my face in her soft hands. But you don't need their approval to be great. You just need to believe in yourself and work with the right people. She'd introduced me to Eleanor Hartley, a former principal dancer with the American Ballet Theater who'd retired to teach. Eleanor had a private studio and only took on a handful of students she believed had the potential to be extraordinary. June tells me you're quite talented, Eleanor had said during my audition, her sharp eyes tracking every movement. I danced for her like my life depended on it, because in a way, it did. This was my second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it at my old studio, where the instruction was mediocre and the opportunities limited. When I'd finished, she'd been quiet for a long moment. Then, you have excellent technical foundation, but you're dancing like you're carrying the weight of the world. What's that about? I've been dancing for people who don't care, I'd said honestly. I'm tired of it. Then dance for yourself. Dance because you love it, because you can't imagine doing anything else. Dance because the music demands it and your body needs to move. Not for approval, not for attention, for you. Something had shifted in me then. She was right. In my first life, I danced to be seen by my parents. In this life, I was going to dance because I loved it. And if that dance led to success and recognition, it would be mine, not a bid for their attention. Eleanor had taken me on as a student, and my grandmother had paid for the lessons without telling my parents. I'd continued going to my regular studio, the one my parents paid for and never thought about again. But my real training happened with Eleanor twice a week. The difference was staggering. Within months, I was dancing at a level far beyond my peers. Eleanor pushed me, challenged me, and most importantly, she saw me. She understood what I was capable of, and she refused to let me settle for anything less than excellence. Meanwhile, at home, nothing changed. My parents continued their pattern of obsessive attention to Sophie and benign neglect of me. Sophie got a new laptop for maintaining a B average. I got a good job when I mentioned I'd made the honor roll. Sophie got a weekend trip to the mall to shop for her school dance. I got $20 and told to get whatever you need. But I didn't care anymore. Not in the way I had before. I had Grandma June, who showed up to every small performance at my regular studio, taking videos and cheering. I had Eleanor, who believed in my potential. I had a secret life that was mine alone, untainted by my parents' favoritism and neglect. At 15, Eleanor had helped me apply for summer intensives at prestigious dance companies across the country. In my first life, I'd never even known these opportunities existed because my parents had never helped me research them. This time, I'd applied to 10 programs and gotten into 7. This one, Eleanor had said, pointing to an invitation from the Pacific Northwest Ballet's summer program. This is where you need to be. They have scouts coming through and you're ready to be seen. My parents had balked at the cost, $5,000 for 6 weeks plus travel and housing. That's a lot of money, Lily, Dad had said, barely looking up from his tablet where he was researching new gaming computers for Sophie. Can't you just do the local summer program? The local program is for beginners, I'd said flatly. This is PNB. It's one of the best companies in the country. I'm sure it's very nice, but $5,000. You're spending $3,000 on a computer for Sophie. That's different. Sophie needs it for school. She doesn't. The school provides computers. She wants it for gaming. Mom had intervened then, using her peacekeeper voice that always ended with me losing. Lily, don't be jealous. Sophie has different needs than you. If dance is really important to you, maybe you can get a summer job and save up for next year's program. I'd stared at her, remembering this exact conversation from my first life. Then I'd cried and begged and eventually given up. This time I'd simply nodded. "You're right," I'd said. "I'll figure it out." I'd gone to Grandma June. She'd written the check that same day. "This is an investment in your future," she'd said. "Your grandfather left me more than enough, and I can't think of a better use for it than supporting my granddaughter's dreams." The summer intensive had changed everything. I'd trained 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, alongside dancers from across the world. I'd been pushed harder than I'd ever been pushed, challenged technically and artistically, and I'd thrived. More importantly, I'd been noticed. Several company directors had watched our final showcase, and 3 had asked to meet with me. One was from the Manhattan Ballet Company, one of the top 10 companies in the nation. "You have something special," the director, Marcus Winters, had told me. "Raw talent, yes, but also maturity in your performance that I don't usually see in dancers your age." "How old are you?" 15. "And where do you train normally?" I'd told him about Eleanor, watching his eyebrows rise with respect. "Eleanor Hartley is a legend. If she's training you privately, she must see something exceptional. Listen, you're too young for us right now, but I want you to keep in touch. When you're 17, 18, I want to see where you are. We might have a spot for you in our second company." The Manhattan Ballet Company. In my first life, I'd never even dreamed that high. I'd made it to a good regional company and thought that was success. Now, I had one of the country's premier directors telling me to stay in touch. I'd returned home floating on air, ready to share my news with my parents. Surely this would make them proud. Surely this would make them see me. "That's great, honey," Mom had said, scrolling through her phone. "Sophie, did you remember to pack your retainer?" We were in the car, heading to drop Sophie off at Sleepaway Camp, a $1,000 a week camp where she'd do arts and crafts and swim in a lake. They'd taken the whole day off work to drive her, help her settle in, meet her counselors. "Did you hear what I said?" I'd asked from the back seat. "Manhattan Ballet Company. They want me to audition when I'm 17. "That's in New York, isn't it?" Dad had said. "Bit far from home." "It's one of the best companies in the country." "I'm sure there are good dance studios closer by. You don't want to move all the way to New York." I'd realized then that they'd never understand. They'd never see dance as a career, never see my talent as something valuable. To them, it was a hobby, something to keep me busy. No different than Sophie's brief obsession with learning guitar that had lasted 3 weeks before the guitar went in the closet. So I'd stopped telling them things, stopped sharing my accomplishments, my opportunities, my dreams. My real life happened in the hours they didn't track, with the people who actually cared. 16 had brought the next major turning point. Sophie had decided she wanted to go to an expensive private school for her last 2 years of high school, a school that cost $35,000 a year. My parents had toured it with her, raved about the facilities, and started making plans to afford it. I'd been sitting at the kitchen table doing homework when they had called me in for a family meeting. "We need to talk about the budget," Dad had said, and I'd known immediately where this was going. I'd lived this meeting before. "Sophie's education is important, and this school could really help her get into a good college," Mom had continued. "But it's expensive, and we need to make some adjustments." "We're going to need to cut back on some extras," Dad had said, looking at me meaningfully. In my first life, this is when they'd told me they couldn't afford my dance lessons anymore. Not the cheap ones at the regular studio. They'd kept those to avoid looking like bad parents. But the private lessons, the competitions, the intensives, all gone. I'd been devastated. This time, I'd simply nodded. "Okay." They'd looked surprised at my easy acceptance. "You understand then?" Mom had said. "We'll need to stop the extra dance classes. You can still do the regular studio classes, but the private instruction is too expensive right now." "I understand completely," I'd said calmly. "Sophie's private school costs $35,000 a year. My dance lessons cost $6,000. The math makes sense." Dad had frowned at my tone. "Don't be resentful, Lily. Education is an investment." "So is professional dance training, but I understand. Sophie comes first. She always has." "That's not fair," Mom had said. "We love you both equally." I'd looked at her dead in the eyes. When's my birthday? What? When is my birthday? What month? She'd hesitated. June? August 10th. It was 3 weeks ago. You forgot. The silence had been deafening. Sophie's birthday was marked on every calendar, counted down to, celebrated with elaborate parties. Mine had passed without a card. Lily, we're sorry, we've been busy. It's fine, I'd cut her off. Really. I stopped expecting you to remember years ago. I'd walked out of the kitchen, gone to my room, and called Grandma June. She'd remembered. She'd sent a card and a gift certificate to a dance store. Eleanor had baked me a cake. They'd been the only ones. They want to cut my lessons? I'd told her, voice flat. Then I'll pay for them, she'd said immediately. I'll pay for all of it. Every lesson, every intensive, every competition. They don't deserve to be part of this journey with you, Lily. This is between you and me now. And it was. My parents never knew that I continued training with Eleanor, that I went to competitions almost every weekend, that I was building a resume that was attracting attention from companies across the country. They thought I was just doing the basic classes at my regular studio, and they never asked for more details. At 17, I'd had my audition with Manhattan Ballet Company. They'd offered me a spot in their second company to start the following fall, a contract, a salary, a future. I'd accepted immediately. You'll need to tell your parents, Eleanor had said gently. They'll need to sign paperwork since you're not 18 yet. I'd dreaded that conversation, but I'd known it was coming. I'd picked a Tuesday night when I knew they'd both be home and hopefully in a good mood. Sophie had been upstairs on her computer, the fancy gaming one they'd bought her, which she now rarely used. I need to talk to you both about something, I'd said, standing in the doorway of the living room where they were watching TV. Can it wait until after this episode? Dad had asked. No. Something in my tone must have registered because they'd both turned to look at me. I've been offered a contract with the Manhattan Ballet Company, I'd said. I'm joining their second company in the fall. I'll be moving to New York. They'd stared at me like I'd grown a second head. What are you talking about? Mom had said finally. You're starting senior year. No, I'm not. I'm graduating early. I have enough credits. I've already arranged everything with the school counselor. Lily, this is ridiculous, Dad had said. You can't move to New York. You're 17. I'll be 18 in August. And I'm going. We're not signing off on this, Mom had said firmly. You're too young to make this kind of decision. Then I'll wait until my birthday and go without your permission. But I'm going either way. You don't even have a place to live in New York, Dad had protested. Yes, I do. Grandma June has an apartment there, Grandpa's old place that she's kept. She's offered it to me rent-free. Grandma June? Mom's face had twisted. You've been talking to her? Your father said, I've been talking to her for years, I'd interrupted. She's been supporting my dance career. She's the one who paid for my summer intensive. She's the one who pays for my private lessons with Eleanor Hartley. She's the one who remembered my birthday. The look on their faces had been almost satisfying, almost. Eleanor Hartley? Dad had repeated. I thought you stopped private lessons. You stopped paying for private lessons. Grandma never stopped. She's been investing in my future while you've been investing in Sophie's. That's not fair, Mom had started, but I'd held up my hand. I don't want to fight about this. I'm just letting you know as a courtesy. I've been offered an incredible opportunity, and I'm taking it. I'd like your support, but I've learned not to need it. The words had hit like I'd intended them to. Cold, factual, damning. I'd walked away before they could respond, gone to my room and closed the door on their protests. They'd tried to forbid me. They'd threatened to withhold my birth certificate, my passport, any document I'd need. But Grandma June had helped me get copies of everything. They'd tried to ground me. I'd continued going to dance anyway. They'd never actually enforced punishments with me because it required attention they usually reserved for Sophie. In the end, they'd given in, signing the papers with tight lips and resentful eyes. Not because they supported me, but because Grandma June had pointed out that if they didn't, she'd take them to court for grandparents' rights and make the family drama very public. Dad cared more about appearances than about controlling me. I'd left for New York 2 weeks after my 18th birthday. They'd driven me to the airport in silence. No tears, no hugs, just a stiff, good luck before they'd driven away. Sophie had been at a friend's house. She hadn't even said goodbye. I hadn't cared. I was finally free. The first year in New York had been everything I'd dreamed and more. I'd worked brutally hard, dancing 6 days a week, taking classes, rehearsing, performing. The second company did smaller venues, local shows, and occasionally filled in for the main company when needed. By 19, I'd been promoted to the main company. By 20, I was dancing soloist roles. By 21, in this timeline, not my first life, I was being considered for principal roles. Grandma June had come to every performance she could. She'd sit in the audience, sometimes with Eleanor, and cheer louder than anyone when I took my bows. She'd become my real family, the person I called with good news, bad news, any news at all. My parents had come to one performance in those first 3 years. 1. Sophie had been visiting New York for a college tour, and they'd tagged along. They'd sat through my performance. I'd been dancing a featured role in Swan Lake, with police smiles and distracted eyes. Afterward, they'd taken me to dinner. "That was lovely, dear," Mom had said. Though I have to admit I don't really understand ballet. All that jumping around. "You're making a living at this?" Dad had asked skeptically. "Or do you have another job?" "I'm making a living," I'd said tightly. "A good one." "Well, that's fortunate. Sophie's been looking at medical schools. Very expensive. We might need to take out loans." That's what they'd cared about. Not my performance, not my role, not the years of work that had led to that stage. Just whether I'd need financial help or whether they could focus all their resources on Sophie. I declined dessert, claimed I had an early rehearsal, and left. I didn't see them again for over a year. The call had come when I was 22. I was in the studio, working on a new piece, when my phone rang. Grandma June's name flashed on the screen, but it wasn't her voice when I answered. "Is this Lily Chen?" A professional woman's voice. "Yes. This is Dr. Patel from New York Presbyterian. I'm calling about June Pametad's." "Chen, she's listed you as her emergency contact." My blood had run cold. What happened? "She had a heart attack. She's stable now, but she's asking for you." I dropped everything and run. By the time I reached the hospital, Grandma was awake, tubes and wires connecting her to machines, but smiling when she saw me. "Don't look so worried," she'd said, her voice weak. "I'm too stubborn to go anywhere yet." "You better be," I'd choked out, grabbing her hand. "I need to talk to you about something," she'd said. "Something important." "Grandma, you need to rest." "I'm leaving everything to you," she'd cut me off. "The apartment, the investments, all of it, it's all yours." "Don't talk like that. You're going to be fine." "I am fine. But I'm also 85 years old and I need to make sure things are arranged properly." She'd squeezed my hand. "You're the granddaughter I always dreamed of having. You've brought me so much joy. I want to make sure you're taken care of. You've already taken care of me more than anyone ever has. Then let me do a little more. Let me make sure that no matter what happens, you have security. You have a foundation." I'd sat with her for hours, until the nurses made me leave. She'd recovered. Her heart was strong, the doctor said. This had been a warning shot, not the end. But it had reminded both of us that time was finite. She'd followed through on her promise. She'd had her lawyers update everything, made me the executor of her estate, the beneficiary of her accounts. When I'd protested, she'd been firm. "Your father will contest this," she'd said. "He'll be angry. He'll say I was manipulated or not in my right mind. But I have lawyers who will confirm that I'm perfectly competent, and this is my choice. You deserve this, Lily. You've earned it." By dancing, by being a good person, by choosing to build something beautiful instead of becoming bitter, by loving an old woman who everyone else had written off. I'd cried then, and she'd held me like she had when I was 13 and heartbroken. when she'd been the first person to tell me I mattered. Grandma June had died 6 months later, peacefully in her sleep. I'd been 23, established in my career, but the loss had shattered me. She'd been my anchor, my champion, my family when my own family had failed me. The funeral had been a disaster. My parents had shown up the first time I'd seen them in nearly a year and immediately started making plans for Grandma's estate. "We'll need to sell the apartment, of course," Dad had said, "split the proceeds, and there are investments, savings accounts. We'll need to inventory everything." "It's all going to Lily," the lawyer had announced during the reading of the will. The silence had been absolute. "Excuse me?" Dad had finally said. June Chen left her entire estate to her granddaughter, Lily Chen. The apartment, all financial assets, her personal effects, everything. "That's impossible," Mom had said. "She wouldn't. There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake." Mrs. Chen was very clear about her wishes. Dad had turned to me, his face red. "You manipulated her. You took advantage of an old woman." "I loved her," I'd said quietly, "which is more than you can say. You cut her out of your life because she told you the truth about how you treat me." "This is unacceptable. I'm her son. Sophie is her granddaughter too. You can't just take everything." "She could, and she did," the lawyer had said firmly. Mrs. Chen was of sound mind and body when she made these arrangements. She was very specific that Lily had been the only family member to maintain a relationship with her, the only one who visited, called, or showed her any love in her final years. She felt Lily was the appropriate heir. The fight had been ugly. Dad had threatened to contest the will. He'd hired lawyers, made accusations, tried to prove incompetence or undue influence. But Grandma had been thorough. She'd had psychiatric evaluations documenting her mental clarity. She'd kept records of every visit, every call, every birthday they'd missed. She'd even written a letter explaining her reasoning, to be read if the will was contested. My son forgot he had a mother the day he chose his wife's feelings over his own child. He forgot he had a mother when he let his youngest daughter become his only daughter. Lily is the granddaughter who remembered me, who loved me, who gave me joy in my final years. She deserves everything I have to give. The case had been thrown out. Dad had been furious. He and Mom had stopped speaking to me entirely. Sophie had sent me one text. "I hope you're happy with your blood money." I'd blocked her number. With Grandma's inheritance, I'd had security I'd never dreamed of. The apartment, worth over $2 million, was mine, mortgage-free. Her investment portfolio was substantial. I could dance because I loved it, not because I needed the money to survive. At 24, I'd been promoted to principal dancer. At 25, I'd starred in my first full-length production as the lead, Giselle, one of the most demanding roles in classical ballet. And that's when everything had come full circle. The National Theater production was the biggest of my career. Every major critic would be there. Every influential figure in the dance world would be watching. It was the moment that would define my legacy. My parents had somehow found out. They'd called 2 weeks before the performance, the first time I'd heard from them in almost 2 years. "Lily, sweetie," Mom had gushed, as if no time had passed, as if they hadn't sued me over Grandma's will. "We heard about your big performance. We're so proud of you." "Are you?" It wasn't a question. "Of course, you're our daughter. We always knew you were talented." The audacity was stunning. I'd almost laughed. "We'd love to come watch," Dad had added. "If you could get U.S. tickets? We know these things sell out." And there it was. They wanted to be there now. Now that I was principal dancer at a major company, now that critics would be writing about me, now that I was someone worth paying attention to. Not when I was 13 and heartbroken, dancing alone at the Riverside Theater. Not when I was 17 and leaving for New York. But now, when it was prestigious to claim me as their daughter. I could have said no immediately, should have, probably. But the petty part of me, the part that remembered every missed recital, every forgotten birthday, every time they'd chosen Sophie over me, wanted to see how this played out. "Sure," I'd said, "I can get you tickets." "Wonderful, we'll make a whole trip out of it, maybe dinner afterward? We have so much to catch up on." "We'll see," I'd said noncommittally. I'd hung up and called Eleanor, who'd mentored me through all these years and who understood my history. They called, I told her. They want to come. Are you going to let them? I'm going to tell them yes, and I'm going to send them the wrong date. Eleanor had been quiet for a moment. Then, Lily, are you sure? They missed every performance when I needed them there. They chose Sophie's convenience over my dreams every single time. They don't get to show up now and claim credit for who I became. I'm not saying they do. I'm asking if this revenge will actually give you peace. It was a good question. I'd thought about it for a long time. No, I'd admitted finally. It won't give me peace. But telling them they're welcome and then ensuring they miss the biggest night of my life? That will give me something. Closure, maybe. Or just the satisfaction of knowing they'll finally understand what it felt like all those years. Then I support you, Eleanor had said. Whatever you decide, I support you. I'd set up the plan carefully. I'd told my parents the performance was Friday night. The actual performance was Saturday night. I'd sent them confirmation emails with the correct date, made sure they'd booked their hotels and trains accordingly. Friday night, while they were presumably settling into their hotel in New York, I'd been at final rehearsal. Saturday afternoon, I turned off my phone. I didn't want to see their messages realizing the mistake, their confusion, their demands for new tickets. Now, standing backstage in my costume, I felt nothing but calm. In the box seats where I'd told them they'd be, I'd seated Eleanor, her wife, and several other dancers from the company, people who'd become my real family. In the private box, Grandma June's lawyer and her best friends sat, holding photos of her, celebrating her memory at the performance she'd never gotten to see. My parents were somewhere in New York, probably furious, probably trying to get same-day tickets to a sold-out show. I didn't care. For the first time in either of my lives, I truly didn't care what they thought or felt. The stage manager gave me the signal. I took a deep breath, felt the music begin to swell, and stepped into the light. I danced like I'd never danced before. Every movement was precise, powerful, emotional. I became Giselle, the betrayed young woman who finds strength in her own spirit, who transcends the cruelty done to her, who achieves her own form of justice. The role had never felt more perfect, more meant for me. The audience was silent during the performance, the kind of held-breath silence that meant they were completely absorbed. When the final curtain fell, the silence held for one perfect beat and then erupted. The entire theater stood, applauding, cheering, throwing flowers onto the stage. I took my bow, tears streaming down my face, and looked up at the boxes where my chosen family sat. They were standing too, crying, celebrating. This was what it felt like to be loved unconditionally. This was what it felt like to be seen. The reviews the next day were extraordinary. A star-making performance, one critic wrote. Lily Chen commands the stage with technical brilliance and emotional depth rarely seen in dancers so young. The next generation of ballet royalty, declared another. My phone had exploded with messages overnight. Once I turned it back on, I'd found dozens from my parents. Lily, we're at the theater and they're saying the performance was last night? This must be a mistake. Please call us. Lily, answer your phone. We came all this way. I don't know what game you're playing, but this is very hurtful. And finally, from my father, I understand now this was deliberate. You've become a cruel person, Lily. Your grandmother would be ashamed. I'd stared at that last message for a long time. Then I'd replied, Grandma would be proud. She's the reason I'm here. She's the reason I succeeded. You were never part of this journey. You chose Sophie over me every day for years. You missed my recital when I was 13 because of a dentist appointment. You forgot my 18th birthday. You sued me for loving the one person in our family who actually loved me back. You don't get to claim me now. You don't get to be proud now. You weren't there when it mattered, so you don't get to be here when it doesn't. I'd blocked their numbers before they could respond. Over the next few weeks, the hate mail started. Sophie sent long, bitter messages about how I'd ruined the family, how I was selfish and vindictive, how I'd stolen Grandma June's money, and now I was preventing our parents from celebrating my success. They just wanted to see you dance, she'd written. They drove all the way to New York and you humiliated them. What kind of person does that? I'd responded once. The kind of person whose parents drove all the way to take her sister to a dentist appointment instead of watching her perform at 13. The kind of person who learned that she'll never matter as much as you do. I didn't humiliate them, Sophie. I just stopped caring whether they showed up. She'd unleashed after that, calling me every name she could think of. I'd blocked her too. A few cousins had reached out, people I barely knew, trying to mediate or shame me into reconciliation. I'd ignored them all. This wasn't their story. They hadn't lived my childhood. They didn't get a vote. Eleanor had taken me to dinner a week after the performance. "How are you feeling?" she'd asked gently. "Free," I'd said, and meant it. For the first time in both my lives, I feel free. "Both your lives?" I'd smiled. I'd never told her about the rebirth, about the memories of my first timeline. It wasn't something anyone would believe. But I'd given her the edited version that I'd always felt like I was living for them, and now I was living for me. "I'm proud of you," she'd said. Not just for the performance, though that was transcendent, but for choosing yourself, for building a life that makes you happy instead of begging for scraps from people who were never going to give you what you needed. "Do you think I'm cruel?" I'd asked. "For lying about the date?" "I think you're human. I think you gave them a taste of what you experienced hundreds of times, and they couldn't handle even one instance of being overlooked. That tells you everything you need to know." She was right. They'd been furious about missing one performance. I'd been heartbroken about them missing hundreds. The math wasn't even close. 6 months later, Manhattan Ballet Company announced their next season. I was cast as the lead in 4 productions, including a world premiere choreographed specifically for me. My salary had increased substantially. I was being courted by international companies, though I'd turned them all down. New York was home now. I'd bought a brownstone with part of Grandma's inheritance, something that was mine, that I'd chosen, that had no memories of my family in its walls. I'd filled it with things I loved: art, books, a practice studio in the spare bedroom. I'd adopted a cat from a shelter and named her June. Eleanor and her wife came for dinner regularly. Other dancers from the company had become close friends. I'd started dating a violinist from the orchestra, a quiet, thoughtful man who thought my dedication to dance was admirable, not a burden. I had a life that was full and rich and entirely mine. My parents had tried to show up at the theater once more, about 8 months after the first disaster. Security had stopped them at the door. "I'm her father," Dad had insisted, according to what the security guard told me later. "I have a right to see my daughter perform. Your name isn't on any list," the guard had said, and Ms. Chen was very clear that you're not to be admitted without an explicit invitation from her. "This is ridiculous. She's our daughter." "That may be, sir, but this is a private performance and you don't have tickets. I'm going to need you to leave." They'd caused enough of a scene that the theater manager had gotten involved. They'd eventually been escorted out, threatening legal action, claiming parental rights to see their child. The theater had banned them permanently after that. I'd sent a thank you basket to the security team. I turned 27, 3 years after that iconic performance of Giselle. I'd become one of the most recognized dancers in the country, with features in dance magazines, interviews on arts programs, even a small role in a film about ballet. The company threw me a party at the theater, a surprise after rehearsal with everyone I cared about in attendance. There was champagne, cake, speeches about my artistry and dedication. Eleanor had cried during her toast, talking about the scared 17-year-old who'd shown up at her studio and the confident, accomplished artist I'd become. "You've exceeded every expectation," she'd said. "Not just as a dancer, but as a person. You chose grace over bitterness, art over anger, and you built something beautiful from pain. Your grandmother would be so proud." I'd thought about Grandma June often over the years, wished she could have seen this life I'd built, this career I'd achieved, but in a way, she had seen it. She'd believed in it before it existed. She'd invested in it when no one else would. Every success I had was partly hers. The next morning, I'd woken to find an envelope slipped under my apartment door. No stamp, no return address, just my name written in handwriting I recognized. Mom's. I'd almost thrown it away without opening it. But curiosity won. Inside was a card. a store-bought birthday card with a generic message about celebrating another year. No personal note, no signature beyond their printed names, and a newspaper clipping of a review of my most recent performance with certain phrases highlighted: extraordinary talent, mesmerizing, one of the finest dancers of her generation. There was a post-it note attached. We saved this to show you how proud we are. We hope you'll reconsider reconciling. Life is short. Love, Mom and Dad. I'd read it 3 times, trying to find any genuine emotion, any real acknowledgement of what they'd done, any understanding of why I'd cut them off. There was nothing. Just a vague gesture at pride. A suggestion that I was the one being unreasonable by maintaining boundaries. I'd taken a photo of it, sent it to Eleanor with the caption, "Still don't get it." She'd replied immediately, "And they never will. That's not your failure." I'd put the card in a drawer with the others they'd sent over the years. Birthday cards, holiday cards, all generic, all unsigned with anything personal. Evidence of their continued inability to see me as anything but an extension of themselves, a reflection of their status. Then I'd gotten dressed, gone to the studio, and danced for 3 hours. When I finished, sweat-soaked and exhausted and exhilarated, I'd felt the same truth I'd known since I was 13 years old in my second life. I didn't need them. I never had. And I never would. At 30, I'd announced my retirement from performing. Not because I had to, I was still in peak condition, still getting offers, but because I wanted to. I wanted to choreograph, to teach, to give back to the art form that had saved me. I'd taken a position as resident choreographer at Manhattan Ballet Company and opened my own small studio for private students, invitation only, like Eleanor had done for me. I wanted to work with dancers who were serious, who were dedicated, who loved the art for itself, and not for external validation. My retirement performance had been a gala event, a specially choreographed piece that showcased my evolution as an artist with elements from every major role I'd performed. The theater had been packed with celebrities, critics, dancers from companies around the world. It had been a love letter to dance, to the life I'd built, to the girl I'd been and the woman I'd become. In the audience, scattered among the seats, I'd spotted several faces I'd banned years ago. My parents had somehow gotten tickets through a third party. They'd dressed up, brought flowers, sat in the premium section like proud relatives. I'd seen them during my bows, seen Dad with his phone out recording, Mom with tears on her face. Part of me had wanted to stop the show, to have security remove them, but a bigger part of me hadn't cared. Let them watch. Let them see what they'd missed by their own choices. After the show, they'd tried to come backstage. Security had stopped them, as instructed. But we're her parents, I'd heard Mom's voice carrying through the halls. She's been dancing for 30 years, a young dancer had said, someone who'd been listening nearby. Where were you for the first 29? I'd smiled at that. The younger generation at the company knew my story. Not all of it, but enough. They knew I'd built my career without family support. They knew I'd been estranged for years. And they were protective of me, their mentor, their teacher. My parents had left eventually, flowers discarded in a trash can by the stage door. I'd seen them from a window, Dad angry, Mom crying, both of them bewildered by their continued rejection. Sophie had written me a letter that arrived a week later. A real letter, handwritten, 6 pages long. I've been thinking about everything, it started. About how we grew up, about how Mom and Dad treated you versus how they treated me. I always thought you were being dramatic when you complained about favoritism. But I've been in therapy, and my therapist asked me to list memories from our childhood, and I realized I can't remember them ever going to any of your events. Not one. But they went to all of mine. The letter continued with examples, realizations, moments she'd overlooked or rationalized. She'd written about how she'd always gotten new things while I'd gotten hand-me-downs, how they'd paid for her to go to private school, but had cut my dance budget, how they'd celebrated her mediocre achievements while ignoring my exceptional ones. I don't know if you'll ever forgive them, she'd written near the end. I don't know if you should, but I wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what they did to you, and I'm sorry I was part of it. I'm sorry I didn't speak up, didn't notice, didn't care. I was so used to being the center of attention that I never questioned why you weren't there too. She'd ended with, I don't expect you to forgive me either, but I needed you to know that you were right about all of it, and I'm trying to be better. I'd kept that letter. It hadn't fixed anything, couldn't fix anything, but it was an acknowledgement. the first real one I'd ever gotten from anyone in my family besides Grandma June. I'd written back, eventually. A short note. Thank you for seeing it. That matters more than you know. I hope therapy helps you. I hope you build a life you're proud of, one that isn't built on the shadow of our parents' favoritism. But I can't have a relationship with you right now. Maybe someday, not today. She hadn't written back. I hadn't expected her to. 5 years into my retirement from performing, my studio had become one of the most respected in the city. I had 12 students, each one extraordinarily talented, each one dedicated to the art form. I'd learned from Eleanor's approach. I didn't just teach technique, I mentored them through the emotional and psychological challenges of a dance career. 3 of my students had gone on to join major companies. One was principal at Pacific Northwest Ballet, the same company where I'd attended that life-changing summer intensive at 15. Another was soloist at New York City Ballet. The third was in the corps at American Ballet Theater, but moving up rapidly. I was proud of them in a way I understood now that my parents had never been proud of me. I was proud because I'd seen their work, their struggle, their growth. I'd been there for every breakthrough and every setback. I'd invested in them, not because they reflected well on me, but because I believed in them. Eleanor had retired from teaching by then, her hands too arthritic for the demonstrations that teaching required. But she came to my studio often, watching classes, offering quiet observations, beaming at the dancers I was developing. "You're a better teacher than I was," she'd told me once. That's not true. It is. You teach with empathy I never had. You understand your students in a way I couldn't. That's your gift, the ability to see people and meet them where they are. Maybe she was right. Maybe growing up invisible had taught me how to see others clearly. Maybe all that pain had translated into something useful, something beautiful. I was 36 when Dad died. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. Sophie called to tell. May. We'd exchanged maybe a dozen emails in the previous 6 years, always brief, always polite, never substantial. "I thought you should know," she'd said on the phone, her voice flat. "The funeral is next week." "I won't be there," I'd said immediately. "Lily, I haven't spoken to him in over a decade. I'm not going to pretend to grieve him now." "He was our father." "He was your father. He gave up the right to claim me as a daughter a long time ago." She'd been quiet for a moment, then, "Mom is devastated. She keeps asking for you." Then she should have thought about that when she had a chance to know me. "You're really not going to come? Not even for closure?" I got my closure years ago when I stopped waiting for him to care. I'd hung up feeling nothing. Not grief, not anger, not even satisfaction that he'd died without reconciliation. Just nothing. He'd been a stranger who shared my DNA, and strangers died every day. I didn't go to the funeral. I spent that day in the studio instead, teaching a masterclass to advanced students from several companies. I poured my energy into art, into beauty, into the life I'd built that had nothing to do with him. Sophie sent me photos from the funeral. Dozens of people crying, sharing stories about what a good man he'd been, how devoted to his family. The cognitive dissonance was stunning. These people had seen a version of Dad that I'd never experienced. Or maybe they'd just seen the version he'd wanted to project. "He left everything to Mom," Sophie had texted after the will reading. "The house, the savings, all of it. There was nothing for either of us." "I didn't expect anything," I'd replied. "He left a letter for you, though. Mom says you can have it if you want it." I'd almost said no, but curiosity again had won. "Mail it to me." The letter had arrived a week later. It was short, written in Dad's messy handwriting, dated just 2 months before he'd died. "Lily," it started. "No, dear. No, my daughter. Just my name. I know you won't come to my funeral. I know you've made your peace with not having me in your life. I can't say I blame you. Your grandmother was right. I chose wrong over and over again. I let your mother's anxiety about Sophie become my obsession. I let Sophie's needs erase your existence. I told myself I was being a good father by protecting the weak child, but the truth is I was being a lazy father by ignoring the strong one. You didn't need less attention because you were capable. You deserved more recognition because you were exceptional. I see that now too late. I've watched your career from a distance. Yes, watched. I've seen every review, every article, every mention of your success. I've told people you're my daughter, claimed credit for your accomplishments, pretended I was part of your journey. I'm ashamed of that. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't think I deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you, not because of what you've achieved, though that's remarkable, but because you became successful despite me, not because of me. You built a life on your own terms with your own strength. That takes a kind of courage I never had. I'm sorry for all of it. For every recital I missed, every birthday I forgot, every moment I should have seen you and didn't. I'm sorry that by the time I realized what I'd lost, it was too late to get it back. Live well, Lily. You deserve every happiness you've found. Your father, though I know I lost the right to call myself that. I'd read it sitting at my kitchen table, my cat June purring in my lap. I'd waited for some feeling, grief, forgiveness, anger, something. But there was still nothing, just a hollow acknowledgement that, yes, he'd understood what he'd done. And yes, it was too late. I'd folded the letter, put it in the drawer with all the other empty gestures from my family, and gone on with my life. Mom lived another 8 years after Dad died. She'd moved to a smaller house, sold the family home, spent most of her time with Sophie and Sophie's kids. Sophie had gotten married, had 2 children, built a comfortable suburban life. She sent me Christmas cards every year with family photos. I sent her back generic cards from a store. We were strangers, connected only by shared DNA and childhood memories that we'd experienced completely differently. When Mom died, peacefully, in her sleep at 73, Sophie called me again. I know you probably won't come, she'd said. But I'm calling anyway. You're right, I won't. Lily, she's our mother. She loved you. No, she didn't. She loved the idea of me. She loved telling people she had 2 daughters. But she didn't love me enough to show up for me when it mattered. She regretted it, she told me near the end. She said she wished she'd done things differently. I'm glad she had regrets. She should have. Sophie had sighed. You're so cold now. Dance was supposed to make you passionate, not ice. I'm not cold, I'm just done. I spent decades being hurt by her choices. I'm not going to spend my 40s pretending that hurt didn't happen just because she's dead. The funeral is Tuesday. I'll send flowers. I'd hung up and done exactly that, sent an expensive arrangement with a card that said simply, from Lily. Not love Lily, not your daughter, just my name. Sophie texted me after the funeral. There were so many people here, everyone talking about what a wonderful mother she was, how devoted to her family. I kept thinking about you, wondering what you would say if you were here. I'd replied honestly, I would say she was a wonderful mother to you, and that's fine. Not every mother is wonderful to every child. I'm glad you had that experience with her. I didn't. She didn't text back. I was 45 when I received an award from the National Dance Foundation, a lifetime achievement recognition for my contributions to ballet as both a performer and a teacher. The ceremony was at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., a black tie gala with dancers and choreographers from around the world. Eleanor was there, elderly now, but still sharp, still proud. This is everything you deserve, she'd said when they called my name. Everything you earned. I'd given a speech about the importance of mentorship, about finding your people, the ones who see you, who believe in you, who invest in your dreams. I'd thanked Eleanor publicly, crediting her with changing my life. I'd thanked Grandma June, though she'd been gone for over 20 years. I'd thanked my students for reminding me why dance mattered. I didn't thank my parents. Didn't mention them at all. Some reporters asked about it afterward, having done their research and knowing I came from a family I never talked about. Not everyone is meant to be in your story, I'd said simply. I'm grateful for the people who chose to be part of mine. One journalist had pressed, but your parents, surely they had some influence on your career? Yes, I'd agreed. They taught me that I didn't need anyone's permission to pursue my dreams. They taught me that external validation is meaningless if it doesn't come from genuine appreciation. They taught me to build my own family from people who actually care. Those are valuable lessons, even if they weren't the lessons they intended to teach. The quote had gone semi-viral in art circles. Sophie had seen it. She'd sent me a text. Was that necessary? I'd replied, I didn't name them. I didn't shame them publicly. I just told the truth. If the truth embarrasses them, that's not my problem. She'd stopped sending Christmas cards after that. At 50, I'd published a memoir called Dancing for Myself. It was part autobiography, part guide for young artists, part meditation on family trauma and healing. I'd been honest about my childhood, about the favoritism and neglect, about the grief of being overlooked by the people who were supposed to love you most. I hadn't named my parents or Sophie. I'd called them my family in vague terms, had focused more on my own journey than on their failures. But people who knew me understood, and people who didn't know me found echoes of their own experiences in my story. The book had become a surprise bestseller, particularly among artists who'd come from unsupportive families, who'd built careers despite rather than because of their upbringing. I'd received hundreds of letters from readers thanking me for putting words to their experience, for showing them it was possible to succeed without family backing. One letter had stood out. It was from a young dancer, 23, who'd written, I just cut off my parents because they told me dance was a waste of time and I needed to get a real career. Your book made me realize I wasn't crazy for being hurt by that. Thank you for writing it. That letter had made everything worthwhile. If my pain could light someone else's path, then maybe it had meaning beyond just my own healing. Sophie had bought a copy of the book. I'd seen the notification that she'd left a review on Amazon. 1 star. Bitter memoir from someone who can't forgive, she'd written. Family is complicated, and this book refuses to acknowledge the nuance of loving but imperfect parents. I'd laughed when I read it. Even now, she couldn't see it. Couldn't understand that love requires action, not just intention. Couldn't grasp that imperfect was too mild a word for what our parents had done. But that was okay. I didn't need her to understand. I had readers who did. I had students who'd lived similar stories. I had a life full of art and beauty and chosen family. Her inability to see the truth was her burden, not mine. Now, at 55, I stood in my studio watching my newest student, a fierce 13-year-old named Maya, who reminded me so much of myself, practice her turns. She was talented, driven, and carrying the weight of family expectations that were crushing her. My parents want me to quit, she'd told me during our first lesson. They say dance isn't a real career. They want me to focus on academics. I'd seen the fear in her eyes, the desperation to please them while also honoring the art that called to her. Dance is a real career if you make it one, I'd told her, but you have to decide if you're willing to do it even without their support, because that support might never come. How did you do it? She'd asked. Your family didn't support you either, right? I read your book. I found people who did support me. I built my own family. And I danced for myself, not for anyone else's approval. She'd nodded slowly. Can you teach me that? Not just dancing, but how to do it for myself? That's exactly what I'll teach you. Now, watching her perfect a turn sequence, I saw her transformation. She was dancing with joy instead of fear, with confidence instead of desperate need for approval. She was becoming herself. Eleanor had died 2 years ago, peacefully, at 93. I'd been with her at the end, holding her hand, thanking her for saving my life. I didn't save your life, she'd whispered, her voice weak. You saved your own. I just showed you it was possible. You showed me I was worth saving. Oh, my dear, you were always worth it. Always. I'd cried at her funeral, real tears, real grief, real love. Because she'd been my real family. She'd chosen me, invested in me, believed in me when no one else had. And now I was doing the same for Maya, for all my students. I was breaking the cycle of neglect by refusing to perpetuate it. Every student I taught with genuine care and attention was a rebuke to the way I'd been treated. Every time I showed up for them, I was rewriting the script of my childhood. The story of my life wasn't about my parents' neglect anymore. It was about what I'd built despite them. It was about the art I'd created, the dancers I'd mentored, the chosen family I'd assembled. It was about the girl who died at 23 and was reborn at 13 with a mission to live for herself. And I had. Every day, in every dance, in every student who found their strength in my studio, I was living proof that you could transcend the family you were born into and create the life you deserved. I'd never performed for them again after that first rebirth, and I'd never regretted it. Not once. Because every performance after that was mine, earned by my work, celebrated by people who actually cared, treasured by a soul that had finally learned its own worth. That was the real story. Not revenge, not bitterness, but freedom. And freedom, I'd learned in 2 lifetimes, was worth more than any parent's belated approval could ever be.